Story number 1. Someone's following you. It was Friday the 13th and Faye was feeling particularly uneasy. It wasn't just in her head either. The dark clouds that hung overhead added to the feeling of anxiety in the air. She was walking a familiar route to work, but something felt different today. She heard a strange sound coming from the shadows of a nearby alley and quickened her pace, eager to get through the area and leave the strange feeling behind. As she hurried along, she thought she saw a figure lurking in the shadows. She tried to ignore it, but an instinct told her that the figure was watching her. As she continued to walk, she heard more strange sounds and felt like someone was following her. By the time she got to work, Faye was in a state of panic. She was sure that something was following her and she was determined to find out what. That night after work she decided to bravely return to the alleyway. As she began to approach, she could feel a strange presence in the darkness. Suddenly, out of the shadows a figure sprang forth. Faye peered at it and realized that it was only a cat. She let out a relieved sigh and was about to walk away when she heard the sound of footsteps coming from a different alley. Turning around she spotted a tall, cloaked figure emerging from the shadows. Faye expected to feel fear as she faced the figure, but instead she felt a strange feeling of awe. The figure's presence seemed to possess an undeniable power and Faye was suddenly filled with an inexplicable sense of peace and understanding. After a few moments the figure dissolved into the night and Faye was left alone. Faye was certain that the figure was a warning of some kind, a reminder to never take the world around us for granted because danger can lurk in the most unexpected places. From that day forward, Faye never walked alone on a Friday the 13th. Story number 2. Dare. The moon shone brightly in the night sky, illuminating the cemetery in an eerie light. It was Friday the 13th, a day known to bring bad luck and strange occurrences. John and his friends had decided to visit the cemetery as part of a dare, but what they encountered there was far beyond their expectations. As they walked past the gravestones, they heard strange whispers coming from the shadows. When they looked closer, they noticed that the shadows were taking the shape of a human figure. The figure moved closer and closer to them, and John felt a chill run down his spine. He wanted to run away but he was too scared to move. Suddenly, the figure stepped forward and spoke in a deep, raspy voice. "Do not be afraid. I am here to offer you a warning. You should not be here on this night. Leave before it is too late." John and his friends were so scared that they ran away and never returned to the cemetery again. From that day on, they always stayed away from the cemetery on Friday the 13th. Story number 3. Downtown. It was the 13th of the month, an ominous Friday the 13th. I had been waiting for this day to come and it was finally here. I was so excited to have a creepy experience and see what fate had in store for me. I woke up early that morning and put on my most daring outfit, a black dress with a red scarf, and some bold lipstick. I wanted to make sure I was ready for whatever the day had in store for me. I took the bus downtown, and as I looked around I noticed that everyone was acting a bit strange. There was a sense of suspense in the air, as if everyone was expecting something to happen. I shrugged it off and continued my journey. When I arrived downtown, I walked around, taking in the sights and sounds. I felt like I was being watched, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I decided to go to a cafe for some coffee to help me relax. When I got to the cafe, I noticed that it was completely empty. I was the only one there. I grabbed a seat by the window and sat down. I looked out the window and saw a figure standing in the shadows. I couldn't make out who it was, but I could feel that it was watching me. I quickly finished my coffee and left the cafe, not wanting to stay there any longer. As I walked away, I could feel the figure's eyes still watching me. I thought to myself that this was definitely not a normal Friday the 13th experience. I walked around for a while, trying to distract myself and forget about the figure. Eventually I decided to go home, and as I walked to the bus stop I heard a noise behind me. I turned to see the figure standing there, still watching me. I ran as fast as I could, not stopping until I got home. I was relieved to be safe, but I couldn't help but feel that something was still off. I felt like I had just experienced something that I was never supposed to see. I spent the rest of the night at home, not wanting to venture out again. I eventually got some sleep, but I still had an uneasy feeling in my stomach. I knew that I had experienced something truly creepy on this Friday the 13th, and I still get a chill whenever I think about it. Story number 4. Family Day Trip. It was Friday the 13th and Mike and his family had decided to take a day trip to a nearby lake. It was a beautiful day, the sun shining brightly and the lake glimmering in the distance. The family was having a great time, swimming, fishing, and just enjoying the day. That was until they noticed a thick fog rolling in from the woods. As the fog got closer, strange noises began to fill the air. It was a mix of howling and moaning sounds, almost like a chorus of voices from the depths of the woods. Mike's family started to get a little uneasy but decided to stay put, hoping the fog would pass. But the fog didn't pass. Instead, it got thicker and thicker, blanketing the lake and the surrounding area. The family decided they should probably leave, but as they started to pack up their things, they heard a loud thud coming from the woods. It sounded like something heavy had fallen, or been thrown, and it sent an eerie chill up their spines. Mike's family quickly loaded up their car and drove away, not daring to look back. As they drove, they could see the fog slowly fading away in the rearview mirror. Once they were safely home, they turned on the news and learned that there had been a series of strange occurrences in the woods that day. Reports of howling and moaning were coming in from all over the area. The family never went back to the lake again. They all agreed that it was one creepy Friday the 13th experience they'd never forget. Story number 5. Friday Night Prank. It was the night of Friday, the 13th, and for some reason, I had a feeling of dread in the pit of my stomach. I had just been out for a late night walk, and was now heading home, but something was off. The street lights were flickering, and the shadows dancing on the walls as I walked. I could see something moving out of the corner of my eye, but when I looked, nothing was there. I continued walking, and soon heard a voice whisper in my ear. I jumped back in shock, and the voice said, "You're not safe here." I quickly looked around, but saw no one. I started to panic, and felt like I was being watched. I started to run, and the voice seemed to follow me, becoming louder and more menacing. I rounded a corner and saw a figure standing in the shadows. It was a tall, thin figure, wearing a black robe and a hood over its head. I screamed and ran, but the figure seemed to be following me. I eventually made it back home, shaking and scared. I slammed the door shut and tried to catch my breath. I stayed up all night, convinced the figure was still lurking outside. I eventually fell asleep from exhaustion, but my dreams were haunted by the figure. When I awoke the next morning, I found out that it had been a prank by my friends, who had dressed up as a ghost. They were all laughing and happy, but I was still creeped out by the experience. From that day on, I never went for a late night walk again, and every time the 13th of the month rolled around, I was filled with fear. It was a Friday the 13th experience that I will never forget. This is where the stories ends. I hope you guys enjoys it and don't forget to like and subscribe. Stay tuned for more haunted stories.